we are going to talk to Stephen in New York. And Stephen would like to talk about polyamory or politics. And honestly, both of those are good by me. So, Stephen, which one would you like to dive into today?
Well, we talked a couple weeks ago on Discord, and I posed the two things, and both things sounded exciting for both you and Eric. So I figured it'd be up to you, since I was supposed to call last week, and I didn't because some stuff came up. So it's either contention or agreement and conversation. Which would you rather have?
Well, I feel like I would love to have the polyamory conversation while Eric is on air as well. That way, you know, his viewpoints can also be heard on that since we are poly. I know that he would bow out gracefully if we went into the social democracy versus anarchism conversation. It's very possible a lot of our viewers will also bow out gracefully if we get too deep in the weeds on that one.
Indeed.
So let's start there and see where it goes and see if we can keep it accessible to as many people as possible, because not everybody are politics nerds like us.
Correct. Okay. So I guess we should start out with our axioms. I've seen that you're an anarchist. I don't know what kind, because there are many different types.
There are indeed.
I'm pretty safe in the assumption that you are not an ANCAP. So let's keep away from that. But are you like a syndicalist, or where are we with that?
Yeah. So for those of you who are curious, anarchism is a political, economic, organizational set of theories or beliefs about how people should organize themselves. Usually it is anti-state, anti-border, anti-government, and anti-capitalist. There are obviously many, many variations on that spectrum. For me, I tend to go with I call myself a small A anarchist, similar to how David Graeber calls himself a small A anarchist, in that I am comfortable working with most versions of anarchism in order to achieve end goals. I do see a lot of value in mutualism. I see a lot of value in syndicalism. So I see the practical implications of quite a few, but I wouldn't put myself firmly in any one camp right now.
Okay. I will say that I am not what is usually considered what is a new social democrat, which is, from what I've been seeing, just rad libs, who are basically just liberals who want more social safety nets. My axiomatic values when it comes to social democracy are of like the 1800s to early 1900s social democracy, where my fundamental value is giving the workers the majority of power in whatever country they're in. It doesn't matter. And the fundamental difference between like social democracy in that old form and say democratic socialism is the end game. I don't have necessarily an end game. Mm-hmm. My only end game is the workers have all the power to make the decisions for the society that they're in. If they decide to do capitalism, that's that on them. If it's socialism or any other system at the end game, I don't care as long as the power is in the hands of the workers.
Okay, so I feel like we agree more than we disagree. In terms of like, I don't have a particular end goal either. My focus is really, the phrase that I really like is building a new organization in the shell of the old. So finding ways to mutually benefit each other in community within whatever system of government we happen to be experiencing. So kind of taking a lot of the bargaining power off of the table, because we are providing a lot of the services for ourselves that the government otherwise could say, well, maybe we'll take away this right or this access if you don't do what we want. That would be less threatening if we were already doing that for each other in smaller circles. So it's a very similar outlook, I think. I'm certainly not of the idea that like someday we're going to go back to some kind of primitivist society across, you know, all countries or anything.
Yeah, we're not anarcho-primitivists here. Yeah.
Right. If only because I need glasses.
Sometimes as I'm living in the city, I really, really am tempted by the political theory of that. But I think our biggest argument against each other would probably be the need for a centralized government of some sort. When I look at like anarcho-syndicalism, it seems like the government is just taken over by the unions.
Yeah.
Which again, I'm not against, but it seems like even anarcho-syndicalism, for example, has that. Like, yeah, we still have a government, but it's like we elect union reps and they kind of make the decisions and do all the stuff that government's supposed to.
Right.
I think that that's not a bad idea. I think that that's still something that I could be privy to. My only problem with anarchism on the whole is like the total demantalization of any sort of government in terms of like an overarching one. I think that if you just have small communes trying to deal with each other with trade or whatever, like let's say we have one town who has an iron mill and the next town over has the machine tools to make the iron into something, right? I think that if we just leave it up to both of those towns to kind of figure things out, it can become a little problematic, especially the more towns with specialized, because that's kind of the way I would see it happening. It would like towns would become specialized.
Yeah.
And I think that when you go into like the wider and wider as you like, you know, go into like car manufacturing and you go into like making computers, it just becomes a little bit too difficult to not have an overarching government to be like, okay, well, we need to make sure the roads are, you know, working between each of these towns and the railroads and everything like that. Because at that point, if you have these specialized towns, each doing each individual thing, who's really doing, like, we can't really have, it's going to be a little bit harder to do like intercontinental railroads or intercontinental travel.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So the overarching government, I think, is a little bit needed in that than just kind of decentralizing everything.
Yeah. And I think that there are like 5 different conversations we could have just about that concept. I do want to keep things pretty high level and moving quickly. As I say, as I dive into the history of pre-Christian Ireland. So do you know anything about how government was set up in pre-colonized Ireland?
I mean, I know a bit about the era of the Chieftains, but I don't know which era we're talking about specifically.
Right. And I will admit this isn't like a deep knowledge source for me, but it is something that kept coming up as I was doing some research on my end. And it was essentially, there were many, many kings or chieftains that then each of those kings went to another court, and then each of those kings went to the high court. And so there was like 3 or 4 different groups of people involved in making decisions. And most of the time, the decisions were just working, you know, to make sure that there were no big conflicts between the various kingdoms. But in situations where it would be like necessary to band together for things, they had that way of communicating with each other and advocating for their own needs. And the thing that I do want to dispel is this idea that anarchism is fundamentally opposed to government or democracy in any way, shape, or form. It's rather a critique of how it has currently become used. So it's currently like a top down, like the people who are rich and have a lot of resources and have a lot of power are making decisions for everybody else. Whereas the goal ultimately would be to flip that and be bottom up. So like unions, where everybody gets that vote, and then there are representatives, right? And those representatives do then liaise with other reps or with the company. So it doesn't necessarily suggest that there is no government. It's just the way that we talk about democracy in the US is not actual democracy, and the goal is to get back to that and have it be more participatory. At least that's kind of the direction that I've taken it. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm not of the mind that any of the anarchist thoughts would be anti-democracy, other than, of course, anarcho-capitalism. But from my understanding of how Ireland worked, it wasn't great in terms of, like, there were fights all the time, like bloody battles of, like, well, this clan controls this river, and now they're, not allowing people to trade across this river unless that you do something for them, which would do like a chokehold on the inner clans within the island. And that's kind of what I'm foreseeing of not like anarcho-syndicalism. I think would work because you're basically just setting up a parliament of union reps, right? Mm-hmm. So like there could be some sort of government there, but there are some other forms of anarchism where I'm more leery about in terms of that issue, where if one town or system or commune or whatever you want to call it is like, we control this part of the river, we're going to charge you a ton of money to use this river, and all the other communes upriver are just screwed. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody really to deal with that over them, right? There's nobody to like say, no, you can't do that.
Well, I think those are two different things.
Conflict arises.
Well, I agree 100% that would be a problem. And one of the reasons that it was so tense during those more chieftain-based systems in Ireland was because the other side of it is not just clumping everything into their own communities, but also fostering the idea of, collaboration and community and, town halls, meeting with each other and talking things out. I do want to draw one distinction, and then we're going to have to wrap this up, at least for right now. And that is that there's a difference between nobody over them being able to make them do something and nobody being able to make them do something. And so there's this concept that unless there is some higher authority kind of dishing out the rules, that we're basically, it's every person for themselves. But I do think that if a group was like, hey, we don't want to participate on the same level as everybody else, we want to do this other thing, the options are not call the government in to, regulate it, or we're screwed. There are other options available. Yeah, they definitely would require more work on the parts of the individuals. And I think that's a big drawback for a lot of people around anarchism, and probably social democracy too, which is like, oh, well, I want to be able to let the government do their thing so I don't have to think about it. And there would be a lot more requirement to actively participate and become part of your self-government, which can be daunting to a lot of people, especially those who have kind of kept politics at bay for whatever reason in their own lives. But yeah, I do think that this is an interesting conversation, and we agree more than we disagree. And hey, up until the point where we get to decide what happens after the unions own everything, I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah, I'm sorry to the audience for. I thought this would be more contentious than it came out to be.
No.
But yeah, V, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling in, Stephen.
Of course.
Bye. All right, you guys. When it's just me, sometimes you have to deal with a little bit of conversation like the politics of ancient Ireland and how it relates to anarchism, but hopefully that wasn't too painful.